Next, we have Professor Colonel Sujeewa01, whose subject was to be covered by another, but nevertheless, the professor has, he was part of the research, so he has kindly taken it on. And the topic is stress fractures amongst officer cadets. Case study at this particular institution, the Sir John Kotlawala Defence University. Professor Sujeewa01 had his education at Royal College, Colombo. Higher education involved MBBS in 1985 and MD in 1990. His DCH Colombo in 1991, DCH Sydney, Australia in 1993. He's a professor of pediatrics 2008 and a fellowship of Sri Lanka College of Pediatricians in 2010. He is presently the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine that's coming up at Sir John Kotlawala Defence University. He is also professor in pediatrics, Faculty of Medicine at the University of Runa. So with that, I will now request Professor Sujeewa to commence his presentation. Thank you.
Chairperson, let me first thank you for kind introduction and thank the KDO for accepting this paper, which was to be presented by Wing Commander Anusha. It's on stress fractures of KDO cadets. The stress fractures had been recognized more than 150 years back in the military for the first time. And it has been recognized on the basis of foot pain and swelling in military recruits. And STECO recognized this as march fracture on radiographs. The first cited reports date back to 1946, and subsequently some literature had come up on stress fractures in military recruits. This particular injury has a marked impact on the health service of personnel, and it imposes a significant financial burden on the military by delaying the training of new recruits. The stress fractures increase the length of training time, the program costs, and also the time to military readiness. It is caused by repeated trauma. It commonly occurs in sedentary people who suddenly undertake a burst of exercise. Muscle fatigue is known to contribute for that. The muscles, usually those in the lower leg, become fatigued after long distance running, and they lose their ability to absorb shock. And then the bones now experience larger stresses, and that increases the risk of fracture. So the objectives of this study was to describe the nature of stress fractures among KDU cadets and to identify the risk factors associated with stress fractures. A clinical assessment was done on cadets reporting sick with persistent limb pain for more than 4 weeks. It was done during a period of 14 months at MI room KDU. And then we tried to identify the one with stress fractures and the probable causes. We studied their background, we studied their physical activity before entering KDU, the BMI, the site of fracture, and the fractures we tried to confirm the fractures radiographically 2 weeks after the presentation. There were 175 cadets in the relevant intake. 19 students presented with persistent lower limb pain for more than 2 weeks. And 13 of them had radiologically proven stress fractures. All had stress fractures in tibia and fibula, the two leg bones. And no stress fractures in the upper limbs were detected. Out of the 13, 9 had bilateral stress fractures and 4 had unilateral stress fractures. And out of that 9 who had bilateral stress fractures, 7 had bilateral tibial stress fractures. And 2 cadets had bilateral tibial and fibular fractures, which means that 2 of them had actually fractured both bones in both legs. Out of the unilateral fractures, 3 cadets had left tibial fractures and 1 had right tibial fracture. and there wasn't a single person who had a fracture involving the fibula alone. So 13 out of the intake of 175 were found to have stress fractures, and that comes to an incidence of per intake to be 8%. When you look at their background, all the cadets with stress fractures were from urban communities. None of them had taken part in outdoor sports activities at national and international level. All had taken part in school level sports activities. The BMI, the body mass index of 7 cadets with stress fractures were between 17 to 25%. 70 to 25 kilos per square meter. 2 cadets had BMIs less than 15 and 2 had BMIs more than 26. So it was not limited to one BMI category. Treatment wise, they had rest for varying periods from 4 to 12 weeks. And they were also given painkillers and sometimes crutches and calcium and vitamin D supplements. Stress fractures has a very vague presentation. Usually they only have few symptoms and always thought to be malingering first. This does cause problems because sometimes stress fracture is not recognized and therefore rest is not allowed and the stress fracture gets worse. It generally presents as a generalized area of pain and tenderness associated with weight bearing. It normally causes severe pain at the beginning of the run and moderate pain in the middle of the run and then severe pain at the end and after the run. It is actually best diagnosed after interviews and examination by a physician. Initial X-rays do not show any evidence of a fracture. It's only during the subsequent stage when the fracture is healing, one can see the healing with a callus formation on the X-ray. That is what we use to diagnose stress fractures in our setup. And we do the X-rays 2 weeks after the onset of symptoms. If a stress fracture occurs in a weight-bearing bone, healing will be delayed or prevented by continuing to put weight on that limb. Rest is the only option for complete healing of a stress fracture. Complete rest and a cast or walking boot are usually used for a period of 4 to 8 weeks. The risk of recurrence of stress fracture at the same site is still high. And one general rule is not to increase the volume of training by more than 10% from 1 week to the next. And that is applicable even for cadets when they start training, especially if they have had sedentary lifestyles at the time of recruitment. And the rehabilitation usually includes muscle strengthening training as well. You could prevent it. You must allow the bones to adapt to the added stress gradually. We need to put them on muscle strengthening exercises. A change in running surfaces would be helpful and replacement of their shoes should be considered. And increase of calcium and vitamin D intake should be considered. Stress fractures is not a problem limited to one country, and every military service had recognized the problem long time back. In US Army, stress fractures caused by repetitive pounding activities of physical training took a toll on enough of the military population, and then they studied a major research program called Bone Health and Medical Military Readiness. And that was started in 1997 to solve the problem. And medical providers at Fort Jackson, South Carolina categorized many of the common injuries seen in soldiers as overuse. According to Armstrong, approximately 5% of all military recruits incur stress fractures, predominantly in the lower extremities during physical training.